Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we're reading the wonderful book Sefer Halkkarim by Rabbi Joseph Albo, which gives us the philosophy behind the fundamentals of Judaism. And it's chock full of lots of wise information. So hopefully you're enjoying this. Make sure you like the video and feel free to share it on social media. We're making good ground. Shalom, Mom. So glad to have you with us. And so we're on chapter 31 of book 2 of 4 books. And so, let's just dive right in. If we reflect upon nature as a whole, we find that it consists of 3 parts, which cannot be denied. First, the lower world, the world of the elements and of genesis and decay. Second, the world of the spheres, celestial. Third, the world of angels. These 3 parts are absolutely different from each other. In the lower world, which is the world of genesis and destruction, we find that there is no individual permanence. Key point, no individual permanence, but all the individuals come to an end. In the world of the spheres, all the individuals are permanent as such and are not subject to decay, but they are corporeal and are affected with corporeal accidents. They have form and shape, they occupy space, they come under the category of quantity and are composed of parts. These 2 divisions, though different, act and react upon each other. The motions of the spheres and their change of position produce motions and changes in the elements, and this has to do with old astrological thought. It's not modern-day cosmology in any stretch of the element or any stretch of imagination. Sometimes they cause the wet element to predominate, and sometimes the opposite, the dry, sometimes the cold, and sometimes the hot. This brings about a mixture of the elements. I mean, this is notions they get from the heat that comes from the sun, from which a mixture are produce the various kinds of minerals. The mixtures rise to a higher level and a new and superior combination arises, assuming the forms in the various species of plants. Fairly logical. The mixture rises still higher and is purified gradually until it is ready to receive the form of animal. That's somewhat of an evolutionary thought long before the term was ever derived. These qualities emanate from the spheres not as dead bodies, but by reason of a certain power which they have to give life to the composite things when the latter are prepared for it by the motions of the spheres. And so they hold to some celestial influence on the physical world in their thought patterns, for sure. Forgive me, folks. I just have to have a Tums here. This power, which gives life, is called the soul of the sphere. And inasmuch as we see that the spheres move continually in a circle, and yet every sphere has a different motion from every other, one moves east, one moves west, one moves rapidly, one moves slowly. Yeah, they hadn't, this was the pre-Copernicus celestial notions. We infer necessarily that every one of them has a cause outside of it other than its soul, which gives it a particular motion. This is a question of cause and effect. The individual cause of each sphere is responsible for its individual motion. Those who give the sphere their individual motions are their movers, and these movers are called separate intelligences because they are free from matter, as is explained in the science of physics. Yeah, that's medieval physics. In the Bible, they're called angels, so this is where the Jewish philosophical thought links the powers that be from worlds above and what they have influence on. And when it comes to questions of angels, generally they look at them as just beings of purpose and no deviation from their purpose. It's the way their life force ticks. It follows, therefore, that there must be a third division, which is called the world of angels. This division, though absolutely different from the other 2 mentioned before, acts upon the world of the spheres, as we said before, by giving them a great variety of movements, the one moving east, the one moving west, one inclining to the north, the one inclining to the south, and those which have the same general direction, differing in the specific character of their motions. These different motions bring about the union and combination of the different parts of nature and maintain order continually in the world of the spheres and the world of genesis and decay. The necessary inference is that these three parts have one controlling power which combines and unites them together. A comparison with animal life will make the matter clearer. We find in animals three distinct powers: the nutritive soul in the liver, the vital soul in the heart, and the sensitive soul in the brain. All these powers or souls are different from one another in their functions. The nutritive soul in the liver is similar to the world of genesis and decay, because there the food loses its original form and it changes into the form of blood. It is different, however, from the vital soul in the heart. The vital soul in the heart is similar to the world of the spheres, for as the motion of the spheres cause life to flow to the whole lower world, the world of change and genesis and decay, and if the sphere were to cease its motion for one moment, the world would, by natural law, come to an end, just like they're saying if a heart stops pumping. So the motions of the heart cause life to flow to the entire body, and if the heart were to cease moving for a moment, the animal would die. The sensitive soul in the brain is similar to the world of angels, for from it come the five senses and the other psychic powers, like the forming power, the power of imagination, and the incorporeal powers which cannot be perceived by the senses, but can be apprehended only through the acts or functions which come from them, as separate intelligences can be apprehended only through the acts which come from them. Now, just as these three powers in the body of the animal have one unifying power, called the power which controls the body, a power which binds all the parts and the powers of the body together and is called by physicians nature, so in the world as a whole there is one power which binds all the parts and powers of creation together and controls them. I am not now intending to speak of the rational power which is in man alone, and by virtue of which man is called a microcosm, because he has an intellectual power which thinks and realizes the things in his intellect from their potential state by means of his will, as the world has an intellectual principle which brings all things into existence by its great power and simple will, unlike the lower animals which have no power acting with volition. This is a difference between instinct and the actions of the will, which can do opposite things but only have a natural power, as is explained in Dhyānama. I'm referring here to the power which controls the body of an animal in a general way only, instinct. Such a power exists in every animal, though some of them have more of it than others. Nevertheless, we can prove from this power, as the Rambam says, the existence of a being which controls and binds together all the individual existences and their parts. From the rational power in man, we infer that being is an intellectual substance acting with will, as there is in man an intellectual substance acting with will, else he would not have been given commands by God. The only difference in this comparison between the powers of the body and those of nature as a whole is that in the former, every power acts upon the other power and is in turn acted upon by the latter. Thus the heart gives the power of life to the liver and other organs, and the liver in turn gives the nutritive power to the heart, while the brain gives sensation and motion to the heart and to the liver, and takes from them life and nutrition. But in the world as a whole, it is not so. The substance which exerts influence does not receive any influence from that upon which it acts. For the influence which is bestowed upon the lower beings by the higher is exerted by way of generosity and kindness, and not because of any benefit to the giver. So he's describing the links and the reasons why free will can go awry. All this matter discussed in this chapter of the divisions of existence into these three parts, and the existing of a being who controls all things, though absolutely distinct from them, was shown to Elijah in a nobler and more perfect way in the vision which he saw on Mount Horeb. When he was asked, "What dost thou hear?" Elijah, when he ran away from Jezebel, was grieved because she persecuted him. His answer was, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, and they seek my life to take it away. Then he was told, Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. This alludes to the power which controls the world of Genesis and decay, which rends mountains and breaks in pieces rocks. The Bible says, Before the Lord, because God sees to it that the power does his will, for it is like an axe in the hand of the one who hews with it. The expression, but God was not in the wind, alludes to the fact that nature, which is the wind that rends the mountains and breaks the rocks, is not the power that controls the world of Genesis and decay. Interesting thought. Then it continues, and after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. This is an allusion to the world of the spheres, concerning which it is said, and the Ophanim and the holy Hayot raised themselves with great noise. The spheres being called holy Hayot, as Rambam says in the 3rd chapter of part 3 of the guide, but the Lord was not in the earthquake, indicates that God is not the soul of the spheres, as the ancients thought. The ancients, when they, made the constellations and turned them into astrological signs. He continues, and after the earthquake, a fire. This alludes to the world of angels, which are called in the Bible fire. The flaming fire, thy ministers. The appellation fire is an allusion to the fact that as man cannot perceive the element fire with the senses of sight, because the eye has no power over elemental fire, and yet we are aware of it through its functions or acts, so the angels are known through their acts, though the eye cannot see them. For the very same reason, the Bible compares God to fire, for the Lord thy God is a devouring fire. The meaning is, he is known from his acts, though he cannot be perceived by the senses. That's a pretty key statement when it says, for the Lord is a devouring fire. This is why the Bible calls the world of angels in this vision fire. Our rabbis also call the angels fire. In the treaty Hagiga, they say, what is the meaning of Hashmal? It stands for Hayot Esh Memelat, a fiery Hayot speaking. Fiery Hayot means not perceptible by the senses like fire. The holy Hayot, on the other hand, namely the spheres, which are perceptible by the senses, are not called fiery Hayot. The angels alone are called fiery Hayot. Speaking has reference to the fact that they are known from their acts, which is their speech. And to prevent the error of supposing that fiery Hayot refers to the spheres, and that the expression speaking is to be understood in the same way as the heavens declare the glory of the Lord, the author of the Talmud quotes a Bereshia which explains the meaning of the word Hashmal in a different way, showing clearly that it alludes to the angels, as Rabbi Judah said. The difference is only in the interpretation. The Bereshia says, at times they are silent, and at times they speak. When speech comes from the mouth of God, they are silent, and when there is no speech coming from the mouth of God, they speak. The Bereshia means to explain a very subtle philosophical idea. The effects understands in a manner its cause, and it also understands its own essence. As a result of the conception it has of its cause, which is the more noble of the two, an angel emanates from it, i.e., a separate intelligence. As a result of the conception it has of itself, a sphere emanates from it, as was explained in the 11th chapter of this book. This is the meaning of the expression in the Bereshia. When speech comes from the mouth of God, they are silent. Thus refers to the fact that the conception which the first effect, let us say, forms of God, results in the emanation of a separate intelligence which is not perceptible by the senses. This is the meaning of the expression, they are silent. And when speech does not come from the mouth of God, they speak. This refers to the fact that the conception which the effect forms of its own essence causes the emanation of a sphere which is perceptible to the senses. They speak means the same thing as the heavens declare the glory of God. It is clear, therefore, that the rabbis call the intelligences fiery chayot. In many passages, the rabbis call them fiery seraphim. The meaning of the expression, the Lord was not in the fire, is that God's existence is different from that of the angels. The angels are effects and possible existence, whereas God is a cause and a necessary existent. And to indicate that God's quiddity is absolutely unknown and absolutely simple in a manner inconceivable. The text says in a sequel, and after the fire, a still small voice, pointing to the impossibility of understanding God's quiddity, so much so that the only way to speak of him or of the attributes of his perfection is by way of negation, which we covered, which is the still small voice. The literal meaning of the biblical expression is a voice of fine silence. Fine silence being allusion to the subtle distinction to be observed in the understanding of the various negative attributes predicated of God, as we explained in the preceding chapter. In the same vision, Elijah was told, Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest thou shalt anoint Hazael to be king over Aram, and Jehu the son of Nimshi shall thou anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah shalt thou anoint to be the prophet in thy room. In these words it was made clear to Elijah that the three worlds mentioned before are governed by God. In the world of Genesis and decay, where it is the nature of one animal to overpower another animal or human being to put him to death, like Hazael, who prevailed over the king of Aram and slew him, this is not an accident, but the result of God's providence, rewarding and punishing individuals and groups and exercising judgment through them over those who transgress his will, as is said, and it shall come to pass that him that escapeth from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay. The expression, and Jehu the son of Nimshi shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel, indicates that divine providence stands above the prognostication of the constellations and nullifies their influence in favor of God's will and purpose. The constellations sometimes indicate prosperity to the wicked and misfortune to the righteous. But Jehu killed all the wicked men who worship Baal and saved all the righteous men who worship God, indicating that the judgment in this case was due to divine providence and not to the influence of the stars. Yeah, and that's just the way medieval thoughts were, always looking for outside explanations and mediators. Yeah. Then the text says, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. This indicates that the prophetic inspiration which the prophets get from the world of angels comes only through the will and command of God. To sum up, then, we say that in this great vision Elijah was informed of the division of existences into the three worlds, the world of Genesis and decay, the world of the spheres, and the world of angels. Also, that there is one being over them who binds together all the parts of nature and controls them and watches over their effects in the lower world. Realizing his purpose and will, this is God, who is absolutely different from them. His quiddity is absolutely unknown, and he can be described only in negative attributes, which are called a still small voice, for the reason we gave before. This is the purpose of this chapter, and so we close the second book, which deals with the first principle, the existence of God, and the derivative dogmas derived from it. Praise be to God, who is one without a second. He is first and he is last, and besides him there is no God. Anyway, so now we move on to Mar 3, or Book 3, the introduction. Treating of the second principle, which is the revelation of the Torah, or divine inspiration, inasmuch as the derivative dogmas depending upon this principle are, as we said in the first book, the knowledge of God, prophecy, and the genuineness of the messenger. And since God's knowledge of the existing things of the lower world necessarily comes before all other dogmas, for if God does not know the existing things of the lower world, neither prophecy nor message can come from him. Would be appropriate to speak of the first of the knowledge of God. But inasmuch as God's knowledge of the lower existences must be compatible with the nature of the contingent, which depends upon freedom of choice, we found it proper to postpone treatment of God's knowledge until the fourth book, when we shall discuss the problem of freedom. Where we will therefore first speak of the principle of revelation of the Torah, and then we will explain the dogmas depending on it, prophecy, and the genuineness of the messenger. Chapter 1 of Book 3. Man, being equable in temperament and more capable of thought and reflection than the other animals, is a nobler and more perfect object of creation than they. The equableness of his temperament is evident from the fact that he is equally affected by the contrary qualities, while his ability to think and reflect is shown in his invention of the arts and the sciences. We must not say that the animal species are more perfect in their organization than man, because they require no shade or shelter from the heat and the storm, nor preparation of the food they need, which nature provides ready for their use. Moreover, they have certain instincts, like the beasts and the birds of prey, which they use in hunting their prey to sustain life. Among the ancients there was one who maintained this very thing. He said that man was an inferior creation in comparison with the other animals, for the latter do not need other animals to ride on in order to go from place to place, being more swift of movement than man. Similarly, they do not have to prepare weapons with which to fight against their enemies, for they are provided with natural weapons. The ox has horns, the boar has tusks, the porcupine has quills, the turtle has a shell, and so on. Nor do they need to make themselves any garments, for their garments are given them by nature, and they do not have to prepare their food, for they use it as found in nature, whereas man is devoid of all these things. For he requires garments to cover his body and buildings to serve as shelter and protection against the wind and rain. His food must be subjected to many processes of preparation before it is fit for his nourishment, and many other things of this sort, as is found in the 14th book of the Treatise on Animals. But on reflection, we shall find this idea is quite erroneous. If we consider the various forms as they exist in their matter in the genesis of lower forms of existing things, we find that they form an ascending series in regards to quality. The latter form is superior to the prior one, as through the matter in receiving forms proceeds from imperfection to perfection, first receiving a lower form and then a higher form, and thus gradually ascending from an inferior grade of existence to a more perfect one. It seems to be the flow of nature. Thus matter first receives the forms of the elements, then it raises to the stage of minerals, to which the elements stand in relation of matter. Then it attains the grade of plants, which minerals bear the relation of matter. Then it ascends to the degree of animals, to which plants are related as matter, and then it rises to the grade of man, animals being in the position of matter. Here the process comes to an end. As in a given motion, every part of the motion is for the sake of the part which comes after it. That's a very big point. As in a given motion, every part of the motion is for the sake of the part which comes after. So it seems. In the genetic process of the lower forms of existence, that every part is for the sake of the part that comes after it. And a given motion ends up with a result, which is the final cause of all the partial motions, so the genetic process rises gradually until it attains finally to the human form, where it stops, because this is the end of all the lower genetic processes. That matter always moves from a less perfect to a more perfect form of existence, as the character of the composition rises in quality. It is proved by the coral, which is intermediate, so to speak, between mineral and plant, by the marine sponge, which has only the sense of touch and is intermediate, as it were, between plant and animal, and by the ape, which stands midway between the animal species and man. And this is 400 years before Darwin for sure. Yeah. where the process stops. It follows necessarily, therefore, that man, who is the end of all lower creatures, is nobler and more perfect than all, since in him are combined all the earlier forms which stand to him in relation of matter. Therefore he is greater than all the others, and subdues all the animals and rules them, because he has the power of comprehending the general, whereas the lower animals perceive only the particular. This is a very key point, the difference between general and particular. Having no power to comprehend the universal. That's animals don't have that capability. Therefore, they have particular organs and particular instincts corresponding to their perception of the particular. Thus, they have particular organs to fight in a specific way: the boar with his tusks, the ox with his horns, the porcupine with his quills, the turtle using his shell as a protection. But man, who is the end of all the lower existences, and in whom are combined all the particular perfections of the other animals, is endowed with general comprehension and intelligence. He comprehends all that the other animals do, and besides, he understands the general and not merely a particular thing. Therefore, his organs are general, like the hands which are potentially every kind of weapon, to fight against all kinds of animals in all possible ways and to subdue them. The spear takes the place of horns, the sword represents the tusks of the boar, the shield, the coat of mail protects him as the shell protects the turtle. All these weapons and arms are not born with the human being, as is the case with the animals, so that he might not have to carry a heavy burden with him at all time. This is a very important point, and he goes on to explain how often carrying baggage becomes a problem. And so realizing your design and understanding where your intellect is given for a purpose of fulfillment puts things back in order. I find often when dealing with people in religious circles, they get overwhelmed with emotion and they try to put an emotional motivation that's devoid of any thought forward, and it just doesn't make any sense. Not in right standing with Hashem, but they try to, pose a mystical, heartfelt connection, and that's just, moving things backwards from the mind that God has given you, and the emotions cause all kinds of havoc and negative responses, and it's not a good practice. You've got to have your mind ruling over the emotions and the actions flowing, thoughtfully, to be a person of purpose, for sure. Therefore, the Creator, in forming man, used his wisdom in giving him organs general in their utility, which are potentially all kinds of weapons, and an intellect capable of comprehending generalities rather than particulars, that he may be able to understand all that the animals perceive in the way of particulars, and utilize the weapons above mentioned in different ways when he needs them, and lay them aside when he does not need them. So they may not be a burden to him. It's a very, very key point of knowing when to lay things aside, and often the drama that we see in this world is because people don't want to lay things aside. Shalom, running right. Similarly, man's garments are not attached to his body, so that he may use such clothes as he needs in winter and take them off in the summer, that they may not be a burden, as their wool is to lambs who have been sheared. Intelligence and understanding is given to man to build strong buildings where he can fortify himself against the violence of wrongdoers, instead of the holes of the earth and the rocks used by the animals. By means of his general intellect, he can comprehend all the particular instincts of the animal and their particular perceptions and characteristics. Oh, hi, Patricia. As is said in Job, who teaches us through the beasts of the earth, and maketh us wise through the fowls of the heaven. The meaning is not that the beasts and the fowls are wiser and more intelligent than the human species, and that the latter must learn from them, For the experience belies this. Seeing that man rules and manages them, the meaning is that man with his general intelligence and instruments learns from all the animals all their particular instincts and perceptions, combines them, and he makes them general. So we find in the Talmud, said Rabbi Chaya, the verse, he teaches us through the beasts of the earth, refers to the mule which urinates kneeling, while the verse, and maketh us wise through the fowls of heaven, alludes to the rooster who pets his consort before copulation. Said Rabbi Johanan, if the Torah had not been given to Israel, we should learn modesty from the cat, prohibition of robbery from the ant, and the wrongfulness of incest from the dove. This can be explained in the way expressed above, namely that the particular characteristics of the animals man should learn with his intellect, which combines them and makes them general. In the same way as, on account of his intellect and organs, he is just as capable as though he were provided by nature with all the instruments of war, and with garments corresponding to the wool of sheep, and is able to prepare his food by combining articles of diet in a way that is appropriate and agreeable and wholesome for his nature and temperament. So he should learn all particular good characteristics of the various animals and combine them, and thus invent the arts and the sciences. Yeah. But not become reliant on technology. This is the meaning of Perek Shira, concerning which the rabbis say, whoever says Perek Shira every day is assured to share in the hereafter. To say means not merely to repeat by rote, but to understand with the mind. As in the expression, I said in my heart. The meaning is that one should consider the fact that every visible creature has something to teach us, a good quality or a moral lesson or some wise inference. To quote an example from Perek Shira, what do the heavens say? The heavens declare the glory of God, etc. The word say that is used throughout Perek Shira has the same meaning as signify, like the Talmudic expression, this says, meaning this signifies. The meaning is that from the motion of the heavens we may infer that there is a being who moves them without being himself in motion, and that he is omnipotent, seeing that he moves such tremendous bodies, that is, he is God. This is a philosophic inference as explained in the proper place. We also read here, what do the dogs say? Come, let us bow down and bend the knee. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. The meaning is that from the dog who knows his master, or anyone who treats him well and is obedient, loyal, and grateful to him as far as lies in his power, we may learn the moral lesson of thanking God for the good he has done for us in providing us with food, of submission and obedience as far as lies in our power, even as he does good also to those who are guilty, and we should not be ungrateful. Another example is, what does the ant say, who giveth food to all flesh? For his mercy endureth forever. The meaning is that if one reflects upon the ant, which is a tiny creature and yet prepares her food in the summer and gathers it in harvest, he will learn the quality of industry, and will understand that God gives food to all flesh and prepares sustenance for all the creatures that he has created, in that he has endowed each one with the instinct of seeking its food at the proper time and from the proper source. Man, therefore, who is endowed with knowledge and understanding, must make efforts to obtain food and not be idle. For the blessing of God makes rich those who prepare themselves to receive it. As the rabbis say in commenting on the biblical expression, in order that the Lord thy God may bless thee, to prevent the inference that God's blessing comes to the idle, the sequel reads, in all the works of thy hand which thou doest. But a man might say, inasmuch as the matter depends upon my own efforts, I will steal and rob and plunder as I find opportunity. To counter this, they say, we learn the wrongfulness of robbery from the ant, which never steals or robs or takes anything that belongs to another. The experiment has often been tried to take a grain of wheat from one of them and put it in front of the others. When they approach it, they know by smell that it belongs to another ant, and they pass it by, refusing to take what does not belong to them. This is what Solomon meant when he said, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider his ways and be wise, which having no chief, overseer, or ruler," i.e., none to prohibit robbery, yet keeps away from it and takes pains to prepare her food in summer without robbery. We read in the same place, "What does the dove say? O my dove, that art in the cleft of the rocks." The meaning is that Israel is compared to a dove, so that they may learn her ways, as we read in Midrash Hatzit. The dove is modest, so is Israel. The dove never changes her mate after she knows him, and similarly, Israel never changed their God from the time that they have knew him. This is similar to the passage mentioned above, where it is said that we can learn to reject incest from the dove. In Midrash Hazit, there are many similarities expressed between Israel and the dove. We also find in Pirkei Shira, "What does the apple say? As an apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons. Under its shadow I delighted to sit, and its fruit was sweet to my taste." The meaning is that God is compared to the apple tree, as is said in Midrash Hazit. An apple tree does not give as much shade as other trees, and yet one desires to sit in that small shade because of the expectation of fruit, which is so good and sweet-smelling and agreeable to the taste. In the same way, though, a person who serves God may meet with trouble and suffering and find no prosperity in this world as long as he dwells in the covert of the Most High and abides in the shadow of the Almighty. Nevertheless, he should not abandon his innocence because of the expectation of future reward, which is so sweet and agreeable to those who know it. We also find in Midrash Hazit, all run away from the apple tree in the hot season because it has no shade, so the Gentile nations refused to dwell in God's shadow at the time when the Torah was revealed. Was Israel guilty of the same act? No. Under its shadow I delighted to sit. In this way should the entire Perek Shira be interpreted. The teaching of the whole composition is that man can learn a lesson from all existing things which he perceives with his senses, a lesson concerning conduct. For the human intellect is general and must combine in it all the particulars observable in nature. It is clear, therefore, that he is more noble and more perfect than the other animals because he combines all particulars in a way no other animal does, and because he rules over them by his wisdom and subjects them to himself. As the Bible says, "Thou hast made him to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet." Hope that's kind of clear. Chapter 2 of Book 3. Every natural existent has in its specific form a certain property and purpose which distinguishes it from other species. This purpose which exists in every species is the cause which determines its existence in that specific form. Man is also a natural existent, being the noblest and most perfect of them, as we have explained. He must therefore also have a proper purpose which is related to its specific form. It cannot reside in the faculties of nutrition and sensation, for in that case the perfection and purpose of the donkey and the pig would be the same as that of a man. It is clear, therefore, that perfection of man must consist in something which he has over and above the other animals. And this is where intellect and perception can be reined in. Now we see that man has potentiality and capacity of apprehending concepts, discovering sciences and bringing them from potentiality to actuality, more than all the other animals. Therefore, human perfection must depend on this intellectual power. And this power, let me see, I'm I'm going to highlight that. And this power being divided into theoretical and practical, human perfection must depend upon the theoretical part rather than upon the practical, for the former bears closer relation to man's nature. Yeah, so those naturalists that just think, the only thing that exists is that which is perceivable to the senses, are missing out on so much. I mean, yeah. We cannot say that the purpose of the human intellect is exclusively practical. Okay? That's a very important point. The purpose of the human intellect is not exclusively practical. In other words, it's got more, it must have something more to do with human purpose than just the practicality to enable man to invent arts and trades. For it is made clear in the treatise on animals composed by the Brethren of Purity that as a general rule, the lower animals are more adept in practical skill than man. Moreover, if this were the case, then since the purpose is more important than that which comes before the purpose, this is, key point. Then since the purpose is more important than that which comes before the purpose, the practical arts would be more nobler than the speculative, and those speculative arts which lead to no practical results at all would be vain and of no value whatsoever. But this is contradicted by our nature and universal opinion, for all agree that the theoretical arts are superior to the practical. Again, the joy we feel in a thing relates to the purpose, and to that which is near to the purpose, more so than that which is far from it. There's a key to the connection of joy. Unless you're fulfilling your purpose, you're going to be light on joy. But we find that the satisfaction and joy derived from a little theoretical knowledge are infinitely greater than all the satisfaction derived from practice. This proves that the real purpose of man depends upon the theoretical part of the intellectual power, and this is where the true exercising of free will comes into play. If you're not thinking about your actions, there's no faith involved. You've got to have an idea where you're going in order to get to a destination. This is why we find that man has a stronger desire for the sensibilia of sight and hearing than for those of smell and taste. Nature has put in us a stronger desire for the former because we are more apt through them to acquire theoretical knowledge, upon which human perfection depends. The other sensibilia, on the other hand, bear a closer relation to the corporeal sensations and desires. Okay, yeah. Whereas sight and sound, are more mental senses. Whereas smell and taste and touch, those are linked with desires and corporeal things, which are far away from the specific perfection of man. Man has them only for the maintenance of his body. That's a key point. Man has them only for the maintenance of his body, like the other animals. Very, very, very key point. Now, as every existent has a greater desire for that which has a bearing on his specific form and proper purpose, he has also a strong desire for the powers and instruments which lead to that purpose. Therefore, man has a greater desire for these two sensibilia than for the others, because they play a greater part in leading man to his purpose than the others. And this is the reason why the Bible ascribes to God the formation of these two senses rather than the other one. Solomon says, "The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord hath made even both of them." And since instruction which is imparted by a teacher is more permanent than that which is not acquired, The author of Proverbs explains in another verse that hearing is superior to sight. The ear that hearkens to the reproof of life abides among the wise. In allusion to the superiority of these two senses over the others, because they are instrumental in man's acquisition of perfection, Solomon says in the Song of Songs, "O my dove, that art in the clefts of rocks, in the covert of the cliff, let me see thy countenance, let me hear thy voice. For sweet is thy voice, and thy countenance is comely." In poetic figure, he speaks to his own soul, which he pictures as a dove, and speaks of her as being in the clefts of the rock, in the coverts of a cliff, alluding to the fact that the soul is hidden in the body, its seat not being known. The word countenance in the above passage is expressed in the Hebrew by the plural to indicate two things: letters in a book and the sensibilia, both of which are necessary means of acquiring knowledge, and both of them are comely. Then he says, "Let me hear thy voice," meaning to say that though the voice of a dove is not sweet, the voice of this one is sweet, meaning the voice through which the soul learns concepts from the teacher. That voice, he says, is very sweet. Therefore he says, "Let me hear thy voice, that which thou hast received from thy teacher, for thy voice is sweet, and thy countenance is comely." For through these two senses man's capacities are realized in actua, and he attains his perfection if he uses them properly. Very important point. But if he directs them to the world's vanities, he is as though he were deaf and blind. Thus the prophet calls those who occupy themselves with the vanities of the world deaf and blind. "Hear ye deaf, and look you blind, that you may see." The reason is because they do not employ their senses properly, i.e., to actualize their potential perfections, which is the only way by which man can realize his purpose. In explanation of this, we must say that there are two kinds of perfection, okay? A first and a last. The first is that perfection which a thing has as soon as it comes into existence, the perfection of existence. The other is the perfection which a thing has not solely by existing. It is only potential in the existing thing which attains that perfection when its potentialities are actualized. This is called the perfection of purpose. Very key point. This is the perfection that is intended for man. Take a chair, for example. Its first perfection is attained as soon as it comes into existence, as soon as its manufacture is complete. The last perfection of the chair, the perfection of purpose, is not attained until it is sat on. In the lower animals, the only perfection that is expected of them is the perfection of existence. Hence, in speaking of their formation, the Bible says, "And God saw that it was good," to indicate that as soon as they come into existence, the good of which they are capable is attained and completed, and no other good is expected of them. But in the account of the formation of man, there is no statement that it is good, which seems strange. This is where it's clear that more work needed to be done even after the formation of man. For it would seem that the formation of man should be characterized as good, just like the formation of animals. The reason for the omission is in order to indicate that the good that is intended in the creation of man, okay, this is a very key point. The reason for this omission is in order to indicate that the good that is intended in the creation of man is not the perfection of existence merely, as in the other animals, but in a more nobler perfection, which can be attained when he has actualized his potentials. But as long as his intellect does not actualize its potentials, the perfection intended, namely the perfection of purpose, is not attained. So think about it. Just like I like his chair analogy. Once the chair's made, you can say it's a perfect chair, right? It's attained its perfection in its formation, and that's how the animals are. But there's no perfection in purpose until it's sat on. Once it's sat on, and it may look perfect, but you sit on it and it breaks, it's defective, obviously, right? So when it suits its purpose in function, this is where our thoughts, our speech, and our actions have to reach for that intended purpose. This is the meaning of Solomon's statement: a good name is better than precious oil, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. The meaning is, a good name acquired by good qualities is better than good oil, for a good name is heard much farther away than extends the odor of good oil. But a good name is not an essential and ultimate good of the soul. Therefore, the day of death, when a man has attained his complete knowledge, is better than the day of his birth. For on the day of death he has already actualized the potentialities of his intellect, which is not the case of the day of his birth. For then the perfection of the soul has only potential existence, though the perfection of the body is actual. See the difference? Those two different types of perfection, just in the basic formation and in purpose. The difference between man and animals in the purpose of their creation is alluded to also in variation of expression. Thus, in the account of the formation of animals, we find the expression after its kind, after their kind. And God made the beasts of the earth after its kind, the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the ground after its kind, to indicate that in animals there is no difference between the purpose of one species and that of another. That's an important point. Nor is there a difference between the creation of the male and that of female. There is one general purpose including all of them, and that is the perpetuation of the species, which is the perfection of existence. So that's the statement after their kind. This is the same for all species and for male and female, for the male has no superiority in this matter over the female. But in the case of man, since the purpose of his creation is not merely the perpetuation of the species, but also the perpetuation of the individual, the expression after his kind is not mentioned. Very, very important points that troubled me at times in the past doing writing books and stuff. And the female was not created at the same time as the male, to indicate the great difference between the two kinds of creation, man and animal. The purpose in the latter is perpetuation of the species, wherein the male and female are equal. The purpose of the former is perpetuation of the individual, in which the female is not equated to the male, but was created to help him that he might attain the intended perfection, which was their potentiality at the time of creation and must be brought into actuality. As this perfection is in man potentially, and potential existence stands midway, as it were, between existence and non-existence, the Bible calls it nothing. Thus Solomon says, the preeminence of man above the beast is nothing, for all is vanity. The meaning is, the preeminence of man above the beast is something whose existence is weak. If the passage read, there is no preeminence of man over the beast, it would have the meaning of a purely negative proposition. But since he says the preeminence of man above the beast is nothing, the judgment is affirmative, equivalent to the statement that man has preeminence over the beast, but this preeminence is nothing, i.e., something whose existence is weak, because it is mere potentiality. The student of logic will understand that this judgment has the value of an affirmative position rather than a negative. In reference to this power, Job said, "But wisdom shall arise from nothing." The meaning is that wisdom comes from a potentiality residing in man, which is called nothing. or ayin. Man's final perfection is attained when it becomes actual, not before. And the manner in which this power can attain wisdom is by answering the question, what is it? In defining things. Hence, he says in the sequel, and what is the place of understanding? Interesting. Chapter 3 of Book 3. Everything that is potential must pass from potentiality to actuality. These are the divine laws of existence. Everything that has potential must pass from potentiality to actuality. God's word does not return to him void. And so this is the way potentiality to actuality is decreed. And if it does not, then its potential existence is vain, and as though it were not at all, which is what the atheists think death is, just non-existence. Yeah. They just use it as a cop-out for potential. It is clear, therefore, that if man's ultimate perfection and purpose, which, as we said, is potential, were not realized, the existence of the human species would be vain, for man would have no preeminence over the other animal species. We must therefore explain what this purpose is, that man may endeavor to obtain it. According to the opinion of the philosophers, the ultimate purpose is the attainment of intellectual knowledges. That's according to the philosophers. They say also that the intellect that is acquired by means of it survives after death. This takes place when the intellect, the cognizing subject, and the intelligible object are consolidated into one substance and are identified with the intelligibles in the act of intellect. This, they say, is the ultimate purpose of man and the happiness of his soul. They also maintain that except in this way we cannot conceive of any survival of the soul, and therefore the existence of the human species would be in vain. The human species would have no preeminence over the animal, and the perfection of the species of which we spoke in the preceding chapter would be vain. This is why it's so important to grasp concepts of Almighty God, because that's what carries you forward in the world to come as an achieved potential that permits it to be continued. This is the opinion of the philosophers concerning human perfection. It is also the opinion of many Jewish theologians as stated in their works. They adopted this opinion because they thought that it is the opinion of the Bible. For Moses says, that I may know thee in order that I might find favor in thine eyes. From this, they say, it seems that only he who knows finds favor in God's sight, and no one else. But this is not necessarily implied in the text, which only signifies that he who knows stands on a higher plane than the one who does not know, but nothing else. For the expression that I may know thee refers to God, and no one can know God outside of himself. We must therefore examine this question briefly, enough to give the believer an idea, as is our purpose in this work. If we examine this opinion, we shall find that it is absurd in itself and in disagreement with the divine Torah. For the philosophers cannot by any means avoid the conclusion that the existence of man is vain, thus meeting with the same difficulty which they are endeavoring to escape. The purpose is either one that can be attained or one that cannot be attained. If it cannot be attained, then the existence of the human species is vain, and man has no preeminence over the donkey or the pig. And if it can be attained, it is clear that neither all nor the majority of mankind can attain it, but only 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a generation, like Socrates or Plato. But the other persons who have not as much knowledge as they say, and have not reached their high plane, will be, in their opinion, in the position of the donkey and the pig, since according to their opinion they have not attained the human purpose. The existence of all, therefore, would be vain except the one man in his generation. And if it happens that there is a generation without a man like Socrates, for example, the existence of the whole species at that time would be vain. Thus we see that they are subject to the same objections which they endeavor to avoid. For according to this theory, it would follow that all God's work at certain times and the greater part of his work at all times never attains or can by any possibility attain its purpose. This is something that cannot be charged to any perfect agent, how much less to the cause of causes, who is far above any such limitation. Moreover, even according to their opinion, those ideas which the wise man or the unique one in his generation apprehends may not lead him to his human purpose and perfection. For knowledge concerning the elements and objects of nature does not confer essential perfection upon the soul, even according to the opinion of the philosophers. So it's not about smarts. Certainly, this is true of mathematical knowledge. For what perfection can the soul attain by knowing that the angles of a triangle are equal to the two right angles, or that the external angle of a triangle is equal to the sum of the two opposite internal angles, or that when you add the side of an inscribed decagon to the side of an inscribed hexagon, the resulting line is divided into a mean proportional and two extremes? That's, This knowledge gives perfection to the soul only so far as it is an introduction and a means to the understanding of heavenly objects and the causes upon which the natural objects depend, but it does not of itself give perfection to the soul. Therefore the soul cannot acquire eternity from such knowledge. David calls attention to this fact in the 19th Psalm. The statement is there made that human speculation can make inferences from the motions of the spheres, because we see that the heavens move continuously. As every moving thing requires a mover, we infer the existence of God, who moves them. And being enormous bodies, they point to the mighty force of their mover, thus indicating his glory and his power. This is the meaning of the expression, the glory of God, the word El indicating power in Hebrew, as in the expression Yeshlea El Yadi, which denotes power. Similarly, the firmament, i.e., that part of the atmosphere in which rain and snow and hail and thunder and lightning originate, also points to the great power of God. It is possible also that the word firmament alludes to the diurnal sphere, which Ezekiel also calls the firmament. As in the statement, and over the heads of the living creatures there was like the likeness of a firmament, like the color of the terrible ice stretched forth over their heads above. The psalmist continues to describe how the heavens and the firmament declare the glory of the Lord and the work of his hands by saying, day unto day utters speech, etc. The meaning is that they declare the glory of God through the diurnal motions, which are visible every day and changes by which day differs from another. And similarly, night unto night reveals knowledge. For in reality there is no speech that is a proposition or judgment, such as the world had an origin in time, nor words such as the component words of the proposition mentioned, world or origin. Nor is there even the voice or sound of a single letter, for their voice is not heard. The heavens have not any of these, but their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Through their visible motions, through the sun for whom he hath set as a tent in the heavens, and through whom are known day and night, and through the other celestial motions which cause the genesis of existing things in the lower world, thus pointing to God's handiwork. Further, in the same psalm we read, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, the meaning of which is that the sun is forced in its diurnal motion by the diurnal sphere, like a bridegroom who does not desire to leave his chamber, but is forced to, as the prophet says, let the bridegroom go forth from his chamber, and let the bride out of her pavilion. And despite this fact, the sun rejoices as a strong man to run his course, in order to do the will of his Maker. In explanation of the statement that the sun is forced in his diurnal motion, he refers to the other motion of the sun which is proper to him. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of the earth. You got to remember, too, this is pre Copernicus. So you're dealing with thoughts that the Earth was the centric point of the celestial. They didn't realize that the Earth moved around the sun and rotated also. Yes, because they had no sense of rotation. Till it was proven and established. To the north and to the south. For the sun does not rise today in the same place where it rose yesterday, and in this way he warms now the south and now the north, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. This is the knowledge that may be derived from the heavens and their motions. But it is not this that gives perfection to the soul, enabling it to cleave to the higher beings and return to the place of its origin. The law of the Lord alone is perfect and adequate to bring the soul back to its original home. The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. Big statement there. In the sequel, the psalm describes the preeminence of the divine law over other laws, as was explained in the 8th chapter of the first book. From all this, it is clear that the knowledge of the motions of the spheres and of the natural phenomenon that take place in the firmament of heavens does not confer perfection upon the soul, but if the soul is to attain perfection, it can come only from the knowledge of divine things. But this cannot be unless the knowledge is true, i.e., unless what is in the soul is in agreement with that which is outside of the soul. Then only can the soul unite with the active intellect. But this union can take place only if there is a complete agreement. But this is impossible, for it is inconceivable that there be one so wise that his ideas should agree in every way with the ideas in the active intellect. This is the reason why some philosophers deny the immortality of the soul altogether, because that which man knows of divine things cannot be absolutely true and in complete agreement with ideas of the active intellect. For the soul's knowledge of things abstracted from their matter is mere surmise and conjecture, and it may be that the reality is quite different from the idea. To give an illustration, there is a difference of opinion between the ancient philosophers and that of the modern, whether the first mover is an effect of the first cause or not. Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, and Rabbi Moses Halevi are of the opinion that the first mover is an effect to the first cause, whereas Ibn Rushd maintains that the first cause is the immediate mover of the sphere, and attributes this opinion to Aristotle. Now, if Ibn Sina is correct, then Aristotle did not have the true opinion concerning this question. And we see this today with questions around the Big Bang. You know, they keep trying to break it up closer and get more exact, postulations. Which is the most important of questions concerning divine things, but entertained a theory which is different from the truth. If so, then the entire existence of man from the time of Aristotle to that of Ibn Sina was in vain, since their opinion concerning the most important question was different from the truth. Clearly, then, the philosophers are subject to the objection which they endeavor to avoid. Moreover, even if we grant that the perfection of man is dependent upon the knowledge of ideas, and that this knowledge may be acquired by the whole human race, or the greater part of it, it cannot be denied that there is a difference between one person or another, for it is a matter of experience. This being the case, I should like to know what would happen with Reuben when Reuben has certain ideas and Simeon has one idea more than Reuben. What difference would there be between them when they are both identified as with the active intellect? So this is a question of definition, especially when you think in the world to come. What's going to define you? And if it is maintained that no one can be identified with the active intellect unless he has all the ideas of the latter and they two become one, no man has ever attained this stage, and therefore this kind of immortality becomes null and void, a species of immortality invented by men wise in their own eyes and following the desires of their evil heart, who dive in deep waters and bring up a potsherd. David alluded to this when he said, I hate them that are of a double mind, but thy law do I love. The meaning is, I hate philosophical ideas, but I love thy law, for through it man attains perfection of the soul, embracing the entire species or the greater part of it. For the purpose of a given species must be realized in the whole species or in the greater part thereof. For example, the power of scamonia to pass red gall, or the power of rhubarb to purify the bad mixture in the liver must apply to every individual in the species, whether he be strong or weak. It is impossible that it should not apply to the whole species or to the greater part thereof, for in that case the respective definitions would not be applicable to scamonium and rhubarb. It is clear, therefore, that all individuals to whom the definition of man applies, or a majority of them, should be able to realize the purpose of man unless it be hindered through their own evil choice. If not at all times, this should be possible most of the time, else the existence of the human species is in vain. But it is absurd to suppose that there exists a species with a specific form which does not realize the function and purpose which it ought to realize. Hence Aristotle says that there must come a time when all men will pursue the truth and endeavor to know God as far as it is possible for man. He says this because he thought that otherwise the existence of the human species would be in vain. Now, since the acquisition of knowledge in the manner explained is impossible for all men, we must explain what is the method by which human perfection, embracing the whole or the greater part of the species, may be obtained by the whole species or by the greater part of the species. Chapter 4. Every existing thing, in accordance with its natural capacity, can easily acquire its appropriate quality and perfection, no matter to what species the thing belongs. This observation is clear if we examine the various kinds of perfection peculiar to the human species. We observe that individuals properly formed and of strong constitution acquire good health without effort or work. Health is always theirs. There are others who have good health as an intimate quality, but they must do something, engage in exercise or take walks to maintain their health. There are others, again, of whose constitution and health is not so intimate a quality, and who must take great pains and make special efforts to maintain their health. But if they try hard, they achieve perfect health. There are others, again, whose constitution is so poor that they may try ever so hard and yet cannot acquire perfect health. But with slight effort, they acquire some health, something like health. They prevent their illnesses from increasing. The same thing applies to wisdom or wealth. Some acquire wisdom or wealth with little effort, some only with great toil, and some cannot acquire it with all the labor in the world, but only a certain degree of wisdom or wealth. The same thing holds true of everything in relation to its appropriate perfection. The first cause, being sufficient in itself for maintaining in actua its own proper perfection, needs no act of its own or another to acquire any perfection. The separate intelligences, being free from matter, always have the perfection which is proper to them, and need no act of their own to acquire their perfection, except the act of causing others to move. The spheres. The spheres, on the other hand, though they have intelligent souls, as all wise men agree, yet since they have matter, cannot acquire the perfection appropriate to their nature, except by doing something in their own person, namely move. The act of motion confers upon their intellectual soul its perfection. For as the soul resides in a body, it requires a corporeal act to attain the perfection appropriate to its nature, and yet the spheres differ from one another in this act. The noblest and most perfect of the spheres, the diurnal sphere, needs only one simple act to attain the perfection appropriate to its nature, namely the diurnal motion, which is one simple motion. The sphere of the fixed stars being further away from nobility and perfection than the diurnal sphere must have two motions, the diurnal motion and its own proper motion. Of the other sphere, everyone needs more acts to attain its proper perfection according as it is further from nobility. This is why the spheres have different motions, one having more motions than the other according to its farther from the attainment of its perfection. Thus we find that some of the planets, and especially the moon, have many different motions, for by reason of the moon's distance from nobility it needs more acts than the other spheres, so that through the many motions of the moon may acquire perfection appropriate to its nature. The philosopher agrees with his view in the third summa of the book of the treatise De Caelo et Mundo. Yeah, this is the result of not understanding the proper motions established by Copernicus and Galileo. To them the moon moved. They saw waxing and waning and size deviation, and so they thought there was, different things at play. That's the nature of a 600-year-old book, but it's sound for its time. But you need to put that into perspective. I think the point here is to understand what he's trying to get across as far as the majority of people must therefore be able to attain the perfection of their souls. This shows that no material being can attain the perfection appropriate to its nature except by doing corporeal acts which are completed by the body. Therefore, the spheres must move in order that they may attain perfection which is appropriate to their souls, since they are powers residing in bodies. It follows also that man, who is material being and whose matter is thicker and coarser than the matter of the spheres, must necessarily have more activities than the spheres, in order that by the multiplicity of acts he may attain perfection, the perfection appropriate to his nature, the perfection of his intellectual soul. For if it were possible for man to attain this through intellectual contemplation alone, without any practical activity, the spheres would accomplish this even more easily than would not have to move and do corporeal acts to acquire perfection. The fact is, however, that no material being can acquire any perfection without a corporeal act. As for the irrational animals, they are far removed from the degree of the beings endowed with souls, and cannot, by reason of their nature, attain individual immortality, because they are devoid of reason. They were given, therefore, a mode of immortality which bears some similarity to the immortality of the other beings who have souls. Namely, they were given the immortality of the species, it's the way they perpetuate, to drive. That to them is their immortality. This immortality can be attained through one act or a few, because this perfection is far from the perfection of other beings who are endowed with souls, individual immortality. But in the case of man, since he has a capacity of individual immortality by reason of his rational soul, like the spheres, but is far removed from the degree of the latter, he was given a very great variety of acts, through which he may correct his deficiencies and attain the same kind of degree which the spheres attain with one or few acts. I like how he started out with the example of health. Some people it's very, very easy to flow through life healthy, and they live long, and others have to struggle and balance diets and exercise, and some people have to work at it very, very hard, and maybe inherited certain things. It is clear that not all acts give perfection to the soul, but only those acts which are proper. Moreover, those acts do not give perfection to the soul insofar as they are purely corporeal, for in that case all corporeal beings endowed with an animal soul would attain that perfection. On the other hand, man, being a material being, cannot attain human perfection through intellectual contemplation alone without practical activity. As we explained in reference to the spheres, that, being possessed of matter, they must have corporeal form of activity, such as motion, through which activity they maintain the spiritual perfection appropriate to their nature. It follows, therefore, that the thing which gives perfection to a being having matter as well as an intellectual soul must be something composed of a corporeal activity and an intellectual contemplation. The practical activity does not give perfection by virtue of its being corporeal merely, but by reason of the intellectual comprehension which is involved in the act. In other words, there's got to be thought behind it. As we have explained, the act which is done in such a way, namely that it is a composite of corporeal act and intellectual conception, is the one that gives perfection to the soul. It really comes down to intention. Hashem knows our thoughts and our intentions. So putting our thoughts, speech, and action into proper function is where things all come together. These are the activities we mentioned before, which follow man's rational form and issue from it, not the mere understanding of intellectual conceptions, as those who follow the philosophers think. So although the world to come may be another framework of existence in the mind of Hashem, sustained by the mind of Hashem, what's our connection to it? The action that merits it has to be connected in some way. So, you know what? I think maybe we'll stop here for today. And we'll come back to chapter 5 tomorrow. But it's starting to get into the philosophical bedrock behind the connections between the human soul and the world to come. And he gets into some grand concepts and explains the way the soul and the body separate and connect with heaven, and the reason it comes back down multiple times for a period to the body, and it's all part of the detachment process and adjustment process into the world to come. I mean, when you think about a human baby, when the baby's born into this world of sensory, it cries because it can't understand and decipher, but it knows it has needs, and so it cries when it's hungry. But after a year or so, its eyesight has developed, and it can see and interact, and there's facial interactions and touch interactions, and starts to walk, and the point being, when you get to the world to come, there's a transitory state of development where your soul adjusts to the new environment, and it has to do with dropping the tactile senses of this plane, and understanding the connections that are useful in the world to come, and are factually connected to the way sense perception and distinction is up there. I think, when you understand the greatness of Hashem, it's so easy to get absorbed into what he said to Moses, "You cannot see me and live, for no man can see me and live." You can't see a certain stage and you're totally absorbed. It just is not. And so balancing that and awakening to the possibilities brings such peace and joy to the heart, in the sense that the hope is brought alive. So I think the book gets great from this point out. I did think it dipped a little before the ending, but then it rose back up quickly with inspiration. So hang in there with me. Hopefully you're enjoying this wonderful book, Sefer Halkkarim, that goes behind the philosophical principles of the fundamentals of Judaism, and hopefully there's some tidbits that awaken things in your soul that give you ideas on areas you can grow in and literally make connections with Almighty God in new and unique ways that are bring you to a state of perfection of your life and purpose. Exciting material for sure. Hopefully you're enjoying it. So we'll be back tomorrow at the same time. And we'll be back book 3, chapter 5, starting tomorrow. So till then, have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye for now.